Okay, here's something that seems, well, like a real head-scratcher. If you feel like genuinely believe another country is the best place for you, maybe you think it's more democratic, more free, I don't know, just better way. Get so angry, so upset about losing your connection to the country you're leaving. It seems like a paradox, right?
It absolutely does. It really throws a spotlight on this friction between where someone says their loyalty is and maybe the practical stuff, the benefits they still kind of want to hang on to.
And that exact paradox, that friction, is right where we're diving in today. We're going to unpack a really complex and pretty sensitive situation. It's all about Taiwan's efforts, which seem pretty significant lately, to bolster its defenses against external influence. And a huge part of that friction, it's this policy targeting Taiwanese citizens who also hold China resident IDs.
Welcome back. I'm Joe.
Hey, everyone. Sunny here.
Yeah, so our mission today is really to, pull back the curtain a bit. We want to help you understand the thinking behind Taiwan's actions, look at the specific things they're actually doing, explore the sometimes really intense reactions from people affected, and then connect it all to these bigger ideas about information warfare and influence campaigns, stuff that's, frankly, increasingly part of everyone's world now.
Right. So let's start with the why. Why does Taiwan feel this really urgent need to strengthen its defenses, specifically against influence from China? This goes way beyond just military hardware, doesn't it?
Or absolutely. Miles beyond just ships and planes.
Okay.
For Taiwan, this is fundamental. It's about protecting their sovereignty, their whole way of life. They see activities like espionage or propaganda campaigns as direct interference inside their own house. And a massive priority is protecting the integrity of their democratic elections. And when you look at China's approach, things like the one country, two systems idea, well, Taiwan doesn't just see that as political talk. They see it as an active strategy, trying to chip away at their autonomy kind of from the inside out.
Okay, right. And that leads us to the how. What specific things is Taiwan actually doing? Because it does feel like things have ramped up recently.
They definitely have. A key measure, and the other one getting a lot of attention, is targeting people who hold these China resident IDs, or the household registration, the hukou. The basic thinking here, it stems from Taiwan's own laws.
Right.
The legal view is that holding a China ID or registration essentially means you've taken on Chinese citizenship status. And Taiwan's law basically says you can't hold both Taiwanese citizenship and PRC citizenship status at the same time. In this context, they're seen as mutually exclusive.
So wait, this rule itself isn't totally new, but the enforcement, that's what's picked up speed.
That's exactly right. It's been on the books. We know, the numbers show hundreds of people have lost their Taiwanese status over the last 10 years. I think the figure mentioned was around 679. But yes, the enforcement efforts, they definitely got more focused, more visible around 2025.
And what does that look like, practically speaking? Are they doing broad sweeps, or is it more targeted?
It seems pretty targeted. Recent efforts include reviewing, get this, tens of thousands of people born in China who are now living in Taiwan. They're also actively reaching out to over 10,000 spouses from China to make sure they've actually given up their Chinese household registration.
Wow, okay.
And we've seen specific cases hit the news, right? Like Mr. Li Dongxian and Mr. Su Xinin. They lost their Taiwanese citizenship early in 2025, specifically because they held these China IDs. So yeah, these aren't just abstract numbers, it's happening to real people.
Beyond just the ID cards, are there other, maybe broader legal tools Taiwan's putting to use here?
Yes, for sure. You've got laws like the Anti-Infiltration Act from 2020. That was specifically brought in to give a legal framework to push back against political interference that's seen as directed or funded by the Chinese Communist Party.
Oh, okay.
So that covers things like information warfare, disinformation campaigns, stuff like that. It's about giving the government tools to counter activities they see as trying to undermine Taiwan's political system.
And I'd imagine the scrutiny gets extra sharp for people in certain kinds of jobs.
Precisely. Yeah, there's definitely increased focus on Taiwanese citizens in roles considered sensitive, military government jobs, university professors, people in critical tech fields. The worry is about potential dual loyalties or being susceptible to influence, especially if they're working or politically involved in China while holding that China ID. Even academic collaborations are getting a closer look.
Is Taiwan just doing this on its own initiative, or is it partly reacting to things Beijing is doing?
Oh, it's very much framed as a reaction. China has been rolling out policies designed specifically to make it easier for Taiwanese people to travel, live, work, even start businesses in China. From Taiwan's perspective, these aren't just conveniences. They're seen as strategic moves.
Ah, okay.
Strategic moves to sort of draw Taiwanese citizens closer into Beijing's orbit, blurring the lines, and potentially eroding Taiwan's separate identity and self-government. So, yeah, Taiwan's actions are, in large part, a counter-move to what they see as that erosion strategy.
That really paints a clearer picture of Taiwan's position and actions. Okay, let's pivot now to the reaction side of things. Like you said right at the start, there's been real anger from some people whose Taiwanese status got canceled. And what's kind of striking is this anger sometimes comes packaged with claims that actually China is great, maybe even, more democratic or freer than Taiwan. They might even be pretty harsh critics of Taiwan itself.
And this is where it gets psychologically really interesting, isn't it? Why would someone who, on the surface, seems to prefer China be so incredibly upset about being, well, officially linked only to China? The reactions feel contradictory, and looking at the psychology behind it can offer some real clues.
So what's bubbling under the surface there? What kind of psychological forces might be at play?
Well, one big factor often seems to be identity conflict. You have individuals who've chosen to engage deeply with China, maybe for work, family, opportunity to the point of getting a China ID.
Right.
But they also have roots, history, maybe family in Taiwan. This policy forces them to confront that sort of split identity.
Right.
And when they face real consequences, like losing Taiwanese rights, voting, healthcare, passport, it just cranks up that internal struggle about where they truly belong, who they really are.
It's like the policy forces a choice, or at least highlights that legally they can't easily be both at the same time.
Exactly. And that difficulty, reconciling their choices with these unwanted consequences, that often triggers cognitive dissonance. They made a big choice, right?
Yeah.
Getting that China ID, but losing tangible benefits from Taiwan creates this mental clash, this discomfort. It doesn't align with the positive picture they might have had.
Okay.
So to reduce that uncomfortable feeling, that dissonance, they might unconsciously double down. They justify their original choice by really emphasizing the positives of China and maybe downplaying or criticizing Taiwan. It's a way to make their feelings and actions feel consistent again.
Ah, okay. So the China's better claims could actually be a way to resolve that inner conflict? Like, see, I didn't lose anything valuable because where I am linked is actually superior.
Precisely. It can function as a rationalization. Another strong possibility, especially for those who spend a lot of time physically in China, is the echo chamber effect.
Right, the bubble.
Exactly. Their main source of news might be Chinese state media. Their social circles might constantly reinforce pro-China views and criticisms of Taiwan. Over time, this biased information environment shapes their perception of reality, making those claims about China's system feel, well, true and obvious, even if they don't really stack up against outside information.
So their whole perspective gets kind of skewed by what they're constantly hearing and seeing.
Absolutely. And that connects to information bias, too. They might be really focused on the immediate short-term advantages of that China ID.
Right.
Maybe it smooths business deals, unlocks certain subsidies, makes travel within China easier.
Yeah, the practical stuff.
Right, and they might give those conveniences a lot of weight while maybe underestimating or just overlooking the longer-term costs like losing fundamental Taiwanese rights or the reality of living under a very different political system.
And are these reactions just sort of spontaneous, or do they often connect to deeper things like their background?
Well, the information suggests there are often pre-existing factors in the mix. These individuals might already have strong family ties to mainland China, maybe significant business interests there that make them economically dependent, or perhaps they already held political views more sympathetic to Beijing's perspective.
Ah, okay.
The case you mentioned, Mr. Li Dongxian, who apparently joined the CCP and publicly backed China before his Taiwanese status was revoked, that's a pretty clear example of how a pre-existing political stance can surface when this dual status gets challenged.
So it seems like the ID cancellation itself acts almost like a trigger, forcing these underlying connections, these psychological tensions, out into the open. And it often comes out as anger and this vocal support for China.
That's a really good way to frame it. It's a consequence that suddenly makes visible this complex tangle of personal history, money, psychology, and, yeah, potentially external influences, too.
Which loops us right back to that initial puzzle, the question you hear sometimes debated within Taiwan itself. If you truly believe China is the best place, if you think it's superior, why the deep distress about being tied only to China? What's wrong with letting you stay fully in the country you claim to love most?
And that question really nails the core of the perceived contradiction, doesn't it? From the viewpoint of many people in Taiwan, It looks like these individuals enjoy, maybe even rely on, the basic benefits and freedoms that come with Taiwan's democracy. Universal health care, the right to vote, freedom of speech.
Yeah, things not available in the same way across the strait.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, they seem to want to benefit from and sometimes actively promote a political system in China that is fundamentally odds with Taiwan's democracy.
It looks, let's be frank, like wanting to have your cake and eat it too. Enjoying Taiwanese freedoms while aligning with the system that ultimately threatens those freedoms.
That's precisely how it's often perceived inside Taiwan. It looks like wanting the security, the freedom, the social safety net of the democratic world, while also wanting the economic opportunities or perhaps conveniences offered by an authoritarian state, and doing so without really committing fully to either system, especially not to Taiwan's.
And this kind of behavior, this perception, it ties directly into a concept that comes up a lot in these discussions: great external propaganda. What exactly does that term mean?
Great external propaganda, or Dawah Sun in
Right.
Mandarin, it refers to Beijing's really extensive state-coordinated campaign to shape how the rest of the world sees China, sees the CCP, and sees sensitive issues like Taiwan or Hong Kong or human rights.
Okay, shaping narratives. How do they actually do that? What kind of methods are involved?
It is a whole toolbox. They do everything from cultivating online influencers and key opinion leaders abroad to spread Beijing's messages, to literally buying ad space in foreign newspapers and websites to publish articles that look like news but are actually state-approved content. They're known to manipulate social media platforms using bots and coordinated campaigns. And crucially, they leverage individuals, including people with ties to places like Taiwan, to promote Beijing's viewpoints. This can be subtle, maybe through business connections or cultural exchanges, or sometimes much more direct, like feeding talking points.
And this is where those individuals, the ones with the China IDs or maybe financial links, could end up playing a part, maybe without even realizing it, or maybe sometimes they do.
Exactly. When you have individuals who have these formal ties, like a China ID, or maybe receive funding or support from Chinese entities, and they actively start echoing CCP talking points, criticizing Taiwan's democracy, promoting China's system, well, regardless of their personal intention, their actions can end up serving the goals of this cognitive warfare.
Right.
They effectively become conduits for narratives that help Beijing's strategic goals, even if they personally just see themselves as expressing an opinion.
And that helps explain why Taiwanese society often reacts so strongly to this whole situation. It's not just some bureaucratic rule-following exercise.
Not at all. It's rooted in really deep concerns about national survival and identity. Firstly, it's seen fundamentally as a matter of national security and defining loyalty. In a democracy that feels under constant threat, there's a powerful sentiment that you can't really fully participate in and benefit from the system if your main loyalty, or even just a significant formal tie like citizenship, lies with the entity that's doing the threatening. It feels like undermining the collective defense from the inside.
So defending the very basis of their society.
Yes. And secondly, it's viewed as a necessary defense against information and cognitive warfare. The thinking is, if you allow individuals to enjoy democratic freedoms like free speech, but those same individuals might be using that freedom to spread messages designed to weaken the democracy or spread disinformation that aligns with an authoritarian rival, well, that's seen as a dangerous vulnerability. It feels like the system's own openness is being turned against it.
And I guess there's just a basic fairness issue, too.
Absolutely, that comes up a lot. There's a sense of, well, fundamental unfairness felt by citizens who are fully committed to Taiwan. They pay their taxes there. They participate in civic life there. They look at others who seem to be benefiting from or even actively promoting an opposing system, yet still expect an equal share of Taiwan's, limited resources and hard-won rights, like that universal healthcare system or the right to vote in Taiwan's elections. It raises sharp questions about who's really in the community and committed to its future.
This has been, wow, a really thorough deep dive into something with so many layers.
It truly is complex. I mean, to kind of sum up, Taiwan's actions around these conflicting IDs, they stem from very real, very strategic worries about national security, about protecting their unique democratic identity in what is, let's face it, an incredibly tough geopolitical neighborhood.
Yeah. And those intense reactions we talked about from some of the people affected, they really show this complicated mix of personal psychology, these struggles with identity, economic factors, and yeah, the undeniable possibility of external influence campaigns having a role.
Looking at all these angles together helps us see this isn't just about paperwork or regulations. It really digs into fundamental questions about loyalty, about where you belong, and about the serious challenges democracies face today, especially when information itself and even personal allegiances can become blurred and potentially weaponized.
So maybe here's something to leave you, the listener, with something to chew on. If someone is loudly saying one political system is way better, freer, the absolute best place to be, but then they fight tooth and nail to hold on to the benefits like healthcare, voting rights, a passport from the other system, the one they're criticizing, what does that tell us? What does it reveal about where they, or maybe anyone in a similar spot, truly finds value? What does it really mean to choose where you belong in this world we live in, which feels so connected yet so divided at the same time?
That's a deep question. Maybe one only the individual can truly answer for themselves in the end.
That wraps up our deep dive for today. We really hope this conversation has helped give you a clearer picture of this very complicated issue.
Yeah, keep asking questions. Keep thinking critically and keep looking closely at the different layers of information you come across. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, please subscribe to Sip&Talk. Oh, and speaking of things to check out, go find our old friend Micky's YouTube channel. Seriously, that guy is hilarious.
We'll drop a link in the show notes so you can easily find it. And hey, if you're feeling generous, give him a like and subscribe. Every bit of support helps.
Absolutely. Let's show Micky some love. This is additional time to address China's accusations against Taiwan. Let's also sort out the reality and logic.
Okay, let's dig into it. Because here's where it gets really interesting. Beijing's reaction. How are the Chinese government and their state media portraying these Taiwanese actions?
Yes. The information shows they're pushing a specific narrative. They're framing these measures as the ruling party in Taiwan, the DPP. As them persecuting pro-China individuals. That's the language being used.
Persecuting.
Trying to paint this picture, that Taiwan is unfairly targeting people just for their political views or closeness to the mainland.
Okay. Persecution. Now let's contrast that word persecution with China's own action.
Exactly. This is where the difference is just stark. China's approach towards people they see as dissenters or opponents, including Taiwanese citizens. It's often far more severe and frequently completely outside any recognizable legal process.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Just look at cases we know about. Li Mengche, the Taiwanese human rights worker.
All right, I remember that case.
Imprisoned for 5 years, starting back in 2017. Not for some administrative issue, but explicitly for online comments supporting democracy.
Okay.
Or Cheng Dingbang, a Taiwanese Falun Gong practitioner. Detained in China in 2012, held for months, basically disappeared, no proper legal process.
It's disappeared.
And then there's the scholar, Cai-Chin Shu. He vanished in China in 2018. Later, he was accused of activities endangering national security.
So these aren't about canceling household registration?
Not at all. These are detentions, forced disappearances, imprisonment. Often for expressing views or beliefs. It's a whole different category of action.
Right. So what does this juxtaposition tell us? You've got China, a state with a frankly, widely documented poor human rights record.
Illegal detentions, lack of due process. Yeah. It's well known.
Accusing democratic Taiwan of persecution for implementing administrative, legally defined measures about residency.
While Taiwan's actions, again, are tied to specific laws about identity status and national security concerns, they're not locking people up for political speech in this context.
It seems like a major contradiction.
It really highlights the bigger picture. Taiwan says, look, this policy is about national security. It's about fairness and accessing benefits. It's not political targeting. China's accusation of persecution seems, well, thin on factual basis when you look at what Taiwan's actually doing administratively. But more than that, it throws China's own human rights practices into such sharp relief. It raises questions about potential hypocrisy and even using that kind of language.
Okay, so just to quickly recap, we've looked at Taiwan's legal administrative measures tied to security, identity, law. Then we've seen China's political framing calling it persecution of pro-China individuals.
A very specific narrative.
And finally, the unavoidable contrast with China's actual track record. Severe actions, disappearances, imprisonment against perceived opponents, including Taiwanese citizens.
Right. It's quite the difference. And maybe that leaves us with a thought to consider, What does it really mean when accusations of persecution, serious accusations, are leveled by regimes known for carrying out actual severe human rights abuses themselves against their own people, against perceived opponents? What does that tell you about the language being used in cross-strait relations and maybe the underlying values at play? Something to think about.